Olá, olá, tudo bem? Hi, how are you? I'm sorry, I forgot this was in English, so I started speaking Portuguese, and that's okay. So, I hope you're all well today. We are starting another week. And I believe today's theme, it's always a good theme because every day we do need to make choices, right? So, so, so welcome the people who are arriving. Um, we are going to talk about choices about ourselves. Last week we did talk um, about human beings, how that we have a trinity, and that we have to take care of our body, mind, emotions, and our spirit. So today we are going to go a little bit further and understand how we make choices and how does this affect our lives. Okay, so um, to talk about choices, we need to talk a little bit about our ego, right? Um, we need to understand how our ego works because this affects the way that we make choices in our lives. Basically, all the choices we make, we only make it in two ways, right? So uh, either we choose by fear or we choose by love. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that before we need to understand where does fear come from. And that's why we are talking about the ego to start. So the ego, usually people talks about the ego as if the ego was the villain, but our ego is not the villain. It does have its functions. So the ego has three major functions that we are going to start talking about now. So the first function of the ego is our identity, is our personality, is the self. So if I identify myself as Flavia and you identify yourself as, I don't know, as Rose or Mary or some other name, and if we feel that we are separate from each other, that's because of the ego. So the ego give us a sense of identity and also this perception of separation. So uh, in our personality, ourself. So this is the first function of the ego. When we have it balanced, this identity, we are in peace with ourselves. When it's not in balance, we tend to compare ourselves with other people. We tend to get into comparison and to judge too much. So if this part of our ego is not in balance, we are going to start judging ourselves, judging other people, comparing ourselves with other people, and and going into this comparison. Sometimes we start also identifying with our thoughts and getting into this comparison. And when this happens, we can uh, it can block us. We cannot do things. So suppose we think we are not good enough or that somebody else is better than us, and because the other person is so much better than us, I'm not I'm not gonna even try to do what I need to do. So this is our ego talking. Okay. So when we talk about the ego, we need to understand that all the functions of the ego is to help us have a good life. So so we need to have the sense of who we are, but we need to drop with all the judgments and comparison. We need to walk in life so that we trust ourselves and our connection with our divine. So this is the first function of the ego. So it gives us a sense of identity. It's the self. Okay, so the second function of the ego that we want to talk about is that the ego needs, it's here also to assure our survival. So the ego will do everything it can to protect us. That's one of its function. So it is the ego who has fear, because the ego doesn't know that we are an eternal being. The ego doesn't know that we are a spirit, that we are a soul, and that we are eternal. So the ego has fear. The ego wants to protect us. And in order to do that, it collects all the information. It analyzes and collects information so that we can have information, so to choose to make good choices. Okay, so the ego, it's here to protect us, to assure our survival. So it has fear. Okay, so it's always going to alert us of possible risks in a situation, possible risks that we might be getting into. So it's a little bit like our alert system in a lot of ways. So the when this is in balance, we accept, the analysis of the ego, but we act anyways. Okay, but when this part of our ego is not in balance, we tend to be paralyzed. Okay, so we feel blocked and we stopped trying things, because with when we have a lot of fear, we also have a lot of doubt. So we end up not allowing ourselves to do new things, not allowing ourselves to adventure, to have adventures, to try new things. So this is the second function of the ego. And the third function of the ego is the one that I consider most important, because since our ego doesn't know that we are a soul, that we are eternal, it doesn't really know the purpose of our soul. So the most important aspect of our ego is to serve our soul. So the ego only becomes a problem when it becomes the master of our lives, because the ego is not supposed to be the master of our lives. Our soul is it's the part of us that is here to have the experience. So the ego, it needs to feed our souls with information, so that the soul, the soul, it's our heart, it's here in our heart chakra, so that the soul can make good choices. So when it's so the third function, which is to serve our soul, is the most important aspect of our ego. Okay, so because it is our soul that needs to have experience, it's our soul that needs to have adventures, it's our soul that knows the purpose. All our intelligence comes from the soul. So, and this is the three aspects of our ego. Okay, so when the soul is not the master of our lives, so we tend to uh, try to do everything in the same way, to not allow ourselves to experience new things, and to be a little bit paralyzed. And so what happens is that when we're talking about and why we are talking about that, right? Because when we are talking about choices, we need to understand if we are acting by our ego, okay, if it is our ego that is in command, or if it is our soul that is in command. So, because if our ego is in command, often we are gonna choose by fear. We're gonna tend to do things in an unconscious way. Okay, so we're not really gonna be present, and our perception is gonna be altered. Okay, we are not gonna have a perception that is correct. So when we are talking about how to choose, it's important to understand if we are choosing by fear from our ego, or if we are choosing through our soul that wants to love, to have adventure, to be happy. We need to understand how we are living our life. If our life is guided in a way by our ego, or if it is guided by our soul. And how do we identify that? Because you see, the ego and the soul, they have they hope, let's put it like that, for different things. They want, let's see, I think the word is want. So the ego and the soul, they want different things. The ego wants to be safe. The ego wants to be recognized. The ego wants to be important. The ego wants to have success. Actually, the ego wants to prove himself. Okay? And there is nothing wrong about having success in everything, but that cannot be the goal of our lives. Okay? So if we do things with love, we are going to have success. Okay? But the ego doesn't know he is a divine being. The ego doesn't know about its own brilliant potential. So the ego needs to prove his value all the time. So, and because of that, we enter comparison or we enter fear. Okay, the ego, it, it, it rather to be safe than to try new things. Okay, so uh, and so the ego, it wants to prove itself. It wants to have success, wants to be recognized. And the soul doesn't really care about that. The soul only wants to love and to be happy. Because the soul, she knows she's an eternal being. She knows she's divine. She knows she's brilliant. She knows that she has unlimited potential. So she doesn't need to prove anything to no one. The soul is here to enjoy life and to have as many experiences as she can possibly have. She wants to have adventures. She wants to try new things. She wants to evolve in a lot of ways. And to evolve is to allow herself to grow, to choose different things, to have different experiences. So the soul loves challenges, loves to grow, loves to be happy, loves to play. So the soul doesn't want to prove anything to no one. And this is really important because sometimes we think we are doing all the right things, and it's actually the ego that is guiding us. So let's give an example for that. So, and that's something that really happened. A long time ago, I met a businessman that had a lot of companies in it and everything, and he went through a spiritual awakening. And because of that, a lot of his companies, he has turned turned his companies into social companies, and it changed the way the companies ran. And also he, in this spiritual awakening, he started to take more care of his health. He became vegetarian, and then he became a vegan. He started doing like a lot of uh, courses, spiritual courses. Like he did a yoga instruction, yoga training, a Reiki, and a spiritual connection. And then he went to live in not in the city, but in the woods, in the forest, and he started like having experience with shamanism, and so and one of the things when he started his spiritual path, one of the things he told us is that he was afraid of becoming a caricature. I don't know if that's the name. Let me check if this is it. So he was afraid of becoming, let me see the wording. Uh, let's get another one. A character. You know, he was afraid of becoming something that he was not. You know, he told us that he saw a lot of people who went through a spiritual awakening that has changed their names and that wear funny clothes, and he was really afraid of that, of kind of losing his identity. So because he saw a lot of people, a caricature. So because he saw a lot of people becoming that, and that was one of the things he was afraid of. And so he has done all that. Okay. So and he did. He posted beautiful things in Instagram. Sometimes he was. You didn't see anything, but he was naked in a waterfall and stuff like that. And but once he was visiting here in my city, and he came to us, and he said he wanted to talk to us. And so he said we scheduled a place to talk. And so he proposed us. He said that he was someone in his family that had a medical clinic that did illegal stuff, and that wanted to invest in a spiritual center to wash the money from the clinic. And and so he was asking us if we would like to do that, and we told him no, we don't want to do that. And he said, but you are stupid, you're dumb, this is the opportunity for you guys to do everything you want. And we said, no, we are not interested in everything. And we told him, you know, if you could do that for you. I mean, you always wanted to have your therapeutic center and everything. Why don't you do that for you? And and that was the talk. And he did it. You know, he got this money and he opened this spiritual center. You know, so a person who is really committed spiritually, or to his soul, uh, do you think that he would do this kind of things? You know, so that's the, you know, he did all the right things. Okay, he ate right. He just went through a spiritual search and everything. But the motivation of that was to prove to the world or to everyone, look how I am good. I mean, he helps people. You see, he's not a bad person. But sometimes you need to go within to understand what is the motivation that is guiding us. Okay? So, when it is from the soul, we will not be willing to prove or to show the world how good we are, because we know we are good. The soul knows we are brilliant. The soul knows we are divine. So and that's how we make choices. So, to understand our choices, we need to understand if we are making these choices out of fear to prove something to the world, or if we're making choices out of love. When we do make choices out of love, we'll try to do things anew. And when we do choices, we make choices out of fear, we tend uh, to be willing to stay in a safe place and not to be taking risks. Okay, so And that's one thing that we need to understand when we talk about choices. Okay, so and there is nothing wrong. Sometimes people think that we cannot choose by fear. There is nothing wrong in choosing by fear, but what is important when we make choices is to acknowledge how we are making them, to be conscious with we are choosing by fear or if we are choosing by love. Because sometimes we have a difficult choice to make and we do not feel prepared. So I will give you another example, okay? When I was young, I it was the first time I have always worked in companies. I worked in the IT area for a long time, and I have always had this spiritual search. So I was already a Reiki master and everything, but I was still working in IT companies, and so I decided to quit and to open a yoga studio, and where we would give courses and everything, and things were going well. But I had to look at myself, and I because I wasn't in peace. I was really stressed about having the amount of students that we needed and everything. And I realized at that time that I thought my prosperity came from the company that I worked with, from my salary. I didn't think at that time that I could generate my own prosperity. So, and because of that, I was never relaxed. I was always tense and I could not cope with the situation. So I realized that I was afraid. And what I did, I mean, I could uh, not accept my fear. I could not accept that I was having that situation and judge myself and something like that. Or I could acknowledge that that was something that I needed to work on myself and take a step behind and and work on that issue. And that's what I did. So I took a step behind. I put my resume again and I started searching for a job, and I returned to work in IT companies, and meanwhile I was working on that issue inside me. So, and I have worked on myself, and then years later start my own therapy center, but being in peace with that. So I clearly made a choice based on fear, but I was conscious I was making that because at that time I didn't feel prepared to choose otherwise. But then I was able to make the decision. So I worked on that inside of me. I worked on my acceptation of myself. I worked on that fear. And then years later, I was able to do it to make a different choice. Okay? So there is nothing wrong in choosing by fear, but we do need to be conscious that we are choosing by fear. Okay? So that would be important because if we are not conscious that we are choosing by fear, we will never get out of the fear. We are not going. It means that we are not observing ourselves. We are not working or walking towards self knowledge, towards acceptation. So when we are talking about choices, uh, it's important to understand that when we choose by fear, we tend to be choosing what is safe, okay, or what we are used to, or based in habits that we are, or conditioning that we already have. And when we, so the fear limits, give us limitations, okay? And when we choose by love, it liberates us. It gives us a sense of adventure, of freedom, of peace, of a challenge, of new adventure. And this is something that happens when we choose by love. Okay, so in yoga talks a lot about that. Okay, and because the yoga also says that we have two types of actions. We have two ways that we act. One way, which is the way that I usually say that is the fear way, that this reduces our perception or our true comprehension of ourselves and of life. And when we choose by love, then we that amplifies our comprehension and our perception of ourselves and of life. Okay, so and why it's important for us to observe that, because our choices become actions. Okay, and in conscious actions uh, take us to unconsciousness, and and also not only to unconsciousness, it also take us to the automatic pilot. So we keep doing things, the same way. So we have habits and conditioning. So when you do choose by fear, that most of the time it is we are choosing unconsciously, and so we are going to act unconsciously, and then we are going to go to the automatic pilot and to habits or conditionings. So when we start observing ourselves, it is important for us to understand that we need to choose conscience with conscience. Okay, well, we need to put our attention. We need to observe ourselves so that we are able to choose with conscience. So, because when we have conscient actions that guides us to conscious to live a conscious life. Okay, so conscious actions guide us to our conscious lives, and that means that being more present, to live right here, right now, to have a presence, to be present in everything you do. So we can only do that when we are choosing by love, when we are choosing with conscience. So when we know, not know by our mind, but with our heart, what we are choosing. And knowing by our heart is allowing ourselves to feel everything that these choices brings us. Okay, so when we are not, it's important that the soul, when we talk about choices, the soul is not really seeking for comfort. It's the ego who wants to be comfortable. It's the ego who wants to be comfortable, not our soul. The soul wants to explore and to adventure, new adventures. So, and that's why we need to allow ourselves always to do new things, to have new experiences. And this way we become more conscious of our limitations, of our potentials, of ourselves, and we can walk to live a life with more plenitude, with more gratitude, feeling more with more accomplishment, feeling how do you say feeling more um, not realize feeling this accomplishment like a blissful life. Now we live a blissful life when we allow ourselves to do new things. Okay, each day and every day. Okay, so uh, and uh, and in this process, we also learn not to judge ourselves. Okay, we need to understand that nothing that we do is without consequences. But we also need to understand that it doesn't really matter what we do. You know, we need to welcome it without judgment, because we are learning. We need to adventure, to have adventures, and in this process, we are going to make a lot of mistakes, and it's okay to make mistakes. Actually, it's more than okay, because if you are making mistakes, it means that you are trying It means that you are allowing yourself to have new experience. It means that your life is becoming an adventure. That you are amplifying your perception. That you are uh, experiencing new things, and this is what we are here for. Okay, so. um it's important to have this attitude in life. This is the right attitude to be open to life, to be open to love, to be open to explore. And when we allow ourselves to do that, even if everything goes wrong, we do have a sense of accomplishment inside of us, okay? Because we tried, okay? So that's a little bit what I wanted to talk about today. So I hope you have enjoyed this talk. We are gonna be ending here, okay? And I see you next Monday at the same time. And we are always going to be talking about spiritual things, about the soul and the ego, about the connection with the divine. And so I hope to see you next Monday. Thank you very much. Namaste.